Justin Welby is getting a ton of criticism today on the back of one of the most senior bishops, the Bishop of Newcastle, Helen Ann Hartley, asking for him and saying he should stand down following the horrific, horrendous and shocking report. This is into John Smyth's abhorrent abuse of more than 132 young boys and men. Turns out the Welby new in 2013. And I'm just going to make this point because we've got the other side of the argument in the tick. This is a man, right, Welby, who has dipped his toe into almost everything that's got nothing to do with the church and now is concerned, as are other church members, that everybody's having a go at him. He called the EU the greatest dream realised for human beings since the fall of the Western Roman Empire. He linked Brexit to Trump and fascism. He hired numerous staffers from the Labour Party. He made comparisons of the Rwanda plan to the Nazis and called it ungodly. He likened the climate threat to the Nazis and later apologised for doing so. He entered talks with MPs to chair a citizens' assembly to stop a no deal. And then he complained that the Brexit deal would create a disastrous precedent. Justin Welby, the cameras turned on you. We're delighted to be joined by Church of England priest and former advisor to an old Archbishop of Canterbury, Rowan Williams, the Reverend George Pitcher. George, good afternoon, sir. How are you?
Well, Jeremy, how are you doing?
Well, you're going to tell me that Justin Welby is a very nice man, but I'm going to tell you that the man's in a serious amount of trouble because when you point the finger at so many things and then it turns out that you are having the finger pointed at you, there isn't much sympathy afoot, is there?
I think the finger's pointed at the Archbishop of Canterbury all the time, actually. I don't think it's a matter of it turning round. I read with interest that he'd consulted his advisors who told him not to resign. I found that a little surprising. If I'd been an advisor to the Archbishop of Canterbury, I think my position would have been a bit different. I might have said, you shouldn't have to resign, but you will. It seems to me that he's lost the dressing room now with the bishop coming out going he should resign.
It's very interesting comment.
Perhaps it should be lost the vestry, really, but, you know.
What's a vestry dressing room?
Well, it is. I think it's what the church would call the dressing room, isn't it? But whether it's a dressing room or a vestry, he's lost it, really, hasn't he? Now, because it seems that once a big enough momentum of calls for resignation occur in public life, that it becomes inevitable that somebody will resign.
I think the problem for Justin, George, I think the problem for Justin Welby is, and listen, we can have different political views. I actually welcome that. I think it's one of the greatest things about a democracy. The problem is, Welby is quite well known for plodding in and being quite vociferous about things. That's fine. But you have to look at facts. The Church of England, the Church in general, they're in dire straits in terms of, I say audience, that's the wrong thing. I'm talking about churchgoers. And I suspect a lot of that is, for many of the messages that we get all the time, is for the belief that Welby and other people in the church spend so much time passing judgment on the rest of society in terms of politics, etc., that they're not doing, I guess, in people's minds what they're supposed to do. Today, I mean, he had no awareness or suspicion of the allegations before he was told in 2013, which is 11 years ago, and a full 5 years before John Smyth died. Having reflected, he does not intend to resign. He hopes the Make-In review supports the ongoing work of building a safer church here and around the world, but surely, if you're expected to head up an organisation that's going to deal with making the church safer, the number one thing to do is to admit mistakes, both yourself and the church, that have been made, and how those mistakes didn't make it safe for those 132 boys, did they?
No, I think, and your final point there is the most important in all the points that can possibly be made. What we need to be doing is acting in the interests of victims, not those that have been inefficient in their jobs or those who have been shamefully defended in the past. I think amongst everything you have to say there, Jeremy, much of which I have a great deal of sympathy with, I think a general point that I would like to react with is that being Archbishop of Canterbury, rather like Prime Minister, is one of those jobs now that always ends in tears. It's an impossible job because there's so much to do, and you cannot keep all the plates spinning at the same time. So I think there is something to do here with reviewing the way in which the church as an institution is managed, and I do believe that we might start to do it by importing the kind of management techniques that the private sector would use, so that we actually have people that are aware of the kind of jobs that need to be done with regard to safeguarding and HR and all the other things that most companies are used to doing, leaving the church to do what it should be good at, which is promulgating the gospel.
But that's my point, George. If I can just jump in quickly, I completely agree with you. I know I love having you on here because you look at both sides of an argument. That's important, I think, very important. And this isn't I'm not a fan of his, but I understand this story. The problem is, the point you just said is so relevant. If you speak to many, many people, right? Let me read you a message that I've just literally, as I'm opening my mouth, Dan from Tunbridge just said. Another Archbishop of Canterbury accused of covering up child abuse. What a surprise not. That's why I'm switched off from religion. And however much that's a headline from Dan, just literally from Tunbridge Sent, that is the issue you've got. And what happens is, I think, that if high people in the church, let's take him as an example, spend their entire time bitching about climate change and Brexit and Donald Trump being a Nazi fascist who shouldn't be allowed on the face of the earth, and this is going on, people are going to go, hold on a minute, mate, where are your priorities? Surely your priorities, I repeat, should be with 132 kids who were abused because you did not safeguard them because you had information. I guess that's the issue, isn't it, George? And we can talk about that forever, but I think it's a massive misjudgment, massive.
It's impossible to disagree with your last point, that of course our responsibility and everybody's overriding priority ought to be those that are the victims of these circumstances. I think probably that we're in a place where we need to acknowledge that it's not right, really, that bishops get promoted to positions where they have an auspice, and you're right to draw a distinction with the Roman Catholic Church, where they're expected to be able to run everything all the time. I slightly disagree with you, Jeremy, in the thrust of some of the things you're saying with regard to the Archbishop of Canterbury or anybody else or any other bishop or me as a priest in the Church of England is more concerned with criticising what's going on with politics rather than what our priorities should be.
Well, let me repeat what I said to you before I came. He called the EU the greatest dream realised for human beings since the fall of the Roman Empire. He linked Brexit to Trump and fascism. He made comparisons of the Rwanda plan to the Nazis and called it ungodly. He likened the climate threat to the Nazis and later apologised. That to me is a man who's not dealing with his flock. He's sticking his nose into stuff that he might have an opinion on, but his priorities are wrong.
Yeah, but, well, I think that we're entitled to have a view on what's going on in the world, and I'm not here to. No,
I agree with that. I agree with that. But you should have your house in order, shouldn't you? Shouldn't you have your house in order first? Shouldn't you have Shouldn't you have your own house in order before you start judging other people? I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yes, I mean, I don't know that he didn't know that his own house wasn't in order. He might have dragged his feet and been, distracted by any number of other issues that were on his agenda at a time when he should have been paying attention to what was happening in the grotesque John Smyth situation. But what I'm saying is that I don't think it's as easy, and I think it's an oversimplification to suggest, and I'm not suggesting you're suggesting this, Jeremy, but I think it's an oversimplification for people to go, get back in the pulpit and preach the gospel and get your nose out of what's happening in society and politics and so on. Because actually, the gospel is about politics and society because it calls on people to stand in the corner of who they see the oppressed are, who the marginalised are, the weak and the poor. So, I don't think there's a sort of there are these load of issues that politicians should only look at, and these issues that the church should be concerned with. I think the church should be concerned with everything.
No, but I'm not going to, George, I'm not going to disagree with you because we're friends. But the point is, when you talk about the gospel is about dealing with the marginalised, the abused, the poor and whatever, I respectfully say to you that the Reverend, whatever his name is, Justin Welby, should be more interested in the abuse, the marginalisation and the complete disgusting and appalling treatment of 132 children, rather than standing in a pulpit telling 52% of Great Britain, whether he likes it or not, who voted for Brexit, that they're all mad and it shouldn't have happened. I'm just saying there are priorities. Of course he's going to have opinions, but he's getting it now, George, and he's getting it big style because he's been somebody who has been very, very quick to judge other people, and that is the problem. And I would suspect, and you're a reverend and I have respect for you, but I would expect that's one of the main reasons why the church at this moment in time does not attract more followers. That's just my opinion.
Well, again, it's always terribly interesting talking to you, Jeremy, because you always make the fundamentally strongest point just as you conclude, which slightly distracts me from what you said before. But I just want to return to what you were saying a moment before, because I don't think it's the case, for instance, that, and again, I don't think this is what you were seeking to suggest, but I don't think it is the case that Justin Welby had before him a choice of things to address as priorities, one of which was the grotesque and dreadful abuse of these young boys, who are now presumably young and middle-aged men. Or shall I talk about Brexit or the EU or Trump? So I think I'll go with the latter rather than address that. I don't believe that is something that was a situation that he was realistically put in. But I do believe that the church makes a really dreadful failure of consistently getting its act together on this issue of how it's fallen down so hopelessly on letting... It's not just a word like safeguarding. I mean, safeguarding is a nice, gentle, soft term for something that we should all be doing, but it's actually about letting people in the church commit these grotesque crimes. And that is something that the church has consistently failed to address. And we need to look at a new way that we have a management for the church so that we can not only ensure that never happens again, but we can never be accused of that. I think to finish, I think you make a very good point. I just want to finish with one message, which I think is really, really interesting.
Actually, two. Let's start with Mike in Lincoln. Jezza, hearing that the job of the Archbishop of Canterbury is a difficult job, perhaps if we remove the bishops and any other religious appointments from the House of Lords and religious personages refrain from pontificating on political matters that are of no concern, it might be easier to concentrate on this difficult job. And Nick in Southampton, I think, makes a really interesting point. And he says, I'm a confirmed Christian, Jez, and I've been listening with interest. The only plate the Church of England in my world should be spinning is to proclaim the word of God. Welby rose too quickly. I want my bishops to talk religion. I don't need political statements. Nick in Southampton. Reverend George Pitcher, always an absolute pleasure. Really, really, really appreciate you being on the show with us. Justin Welby's coming under fire today. He knew in 2013 that John Smyth, a clergyman, had abused 132 boys and did very little about it. That is now in the public domain.